There are more than 4,000 AM radio stations licensed across America. Some have been on the air for 100 years. Every car built for generations came with a radio that could pick one up. A government license so hard to get, you cannot start a new one in any city worth having. A built-in local audience, and a century of advertising money behind the whole idea. You buy the station, you sell the ads, you collect the check. It sounds like one of the safest little cash machines in American media. It is not. Because AM radio is dying. Advertising money has fled to Google and Facebook. Car makers are ripping AM straight out of the dashboard. Since the year 2000, nearly 400 stations have gone dark. And here is the twist that turns it all upside down. That station itself is often worth almost nothing. The dirt under its tower can be worth a fortune. In New York, one AM station's 5-acre tower lot sold for $51 million to a warehouse company, and the station is packing up to leave. So what does an AM station actually cost? Where does the money come from now that the ads are gone? And why is the most valuable thing you own not the station, not even the license, but the ground the tower stands on? The buy-in AM stations are cheap now, and that fact alone tells you where the value really sits. In small markets, they change hands for tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes low hundreds of thousands. There are about 4,500 licensed by the government, and in a decent market, you effectively cannot get a new one, so the paper used to be the prize. So when you buy one, you are really buying three things bundled together: a license to broadcast, a physical tower and transmitter, and the land underneath it all. And that land is not a small thing, because of how AM works. On an FM or television station, a small antenna sits on top of a building or a mountain. On an AM station, the entire tower is the antenna. The whole steel structure radiates, electrically hot, with current running through it, which is why it needs a big buried grid of copper wire underneath, and often several towers grouped together to aim the signal. So an AM site is not a pole bolted to a rooftop. It is acres of ground, and those acres, bought decades ago on the cheap edge of town, are the entire story of this video. What you inherit: buy an AM tower, and four things come with the keys. First, the land and its history. Most AM towers were planted in the 1940s and 50s on cheap farmland outside of town, because that is where the space was, and nobody minded a tower. Then the town grew out around them, the suburbs, the highways, the warehouses, and that worthless outskirts dirt ended up in the middle of some of the most wanted land around. Second, the machinery. A broadcast tower facility can cost upwards of $10 million to build, and never stops needing money. A power-hungry transmitter, a licensed engineer to keep a hot tower safe, and endless upkeep on lighting, paint, and that buried ground system. Third, the paperwork and the lease. Government compliance on everything, and a quiet danger. Many broadcasters do not own the land under their towers. They lease it, and a landlord who finds a better use for that ground can pull it out from under the station with little warning. Fourth, the decline itself. An audience getting older every year. Advertising revenue sliding. And now the car companies pulling AM out of new dashboards entirely. The revenue layers: 5 ways an AM tower makes money today. And notice how few of them are actually about broadcasting. Number 1. Local advertising. Just the spot ads between songs and talk. The traditional business. It is shrinking every year, but it is still there. Number 2. Leased airtime. Instead of selling ads, many stations sell whole blocks of hours to religious broadcasters, to foreign language programming, to paid political and infomercials. It stops being a broadcaster and becomes a landlord of airtime. Number 3. The FM translator. Many AM stations now also broadcast on a small FM signal to reach listeners the AM cannot, and that little translator is sometimes worth more than the AM station it rescues. Number 4. Renting the tower itself. A tall AM tower can host antennas for other services. Cellular carriers pay around $2,500 a month for a spot and cover the cost of the work. 4 tenants on one tower is about $10,000 a month, coming in whether anyone is listening or not. Number 5. The land. Selling or leasing the tower site to a warehouse developer or a tower company. This is where the real money now lives, and it is the reason smart owners are in the game at all. Listen to that again. Here is the single sentence that flips this entire business inside out. In the words of one professor who studies it, owning an AM radio station used to be a license to print money. Now it is valuable real estate. Whatever use of that land brings in the most cash is what wins, and the antenna comes down. Look at the numbers behind that. Of about 4,500 AM stations, nearly 400 have gone dark since the year 2000. In a single pandemic year, around 80 went silent. Those licenses are not worth much anymore, but the land can be worth a small fortune. Here is the proof. A New York station called WFME, owned by a religious broadcaster, sat on a 5-acre tower site right on the border of Brooklyn and Queens, some of the densest and most valuable ground in the entire country. They sold that dirt to a warehouse developer for $51 million. That station is moving its tower somewhere cheaper, and the lot is becoming parking and storage for delivery trucks. Listen to that again. A 5-acre patch of dirt, held for decades only because it had a radio tower standing on it, sold for $51 million. That station on top was almost beside the point. You were never really running a radio station. You were sitting on a piece of real estate, and you nearly forgot to notice. The ledger. So what does it cost to keep one of these on the air? Start with the transmitter and the power bill. AM is thirsty. A big station pushes tens of thousands of watts into that tower, and the electricity bill reflects every one of them. Then the engineer. A hot, high-voltage tower is not something you leave to an amateur. It needs a licensed broadcast engineer to stay legal and safe. Then the tower itself. Lighting so aircraft can see it, paint, inspection, and upkeep on that buried grid of copper wire in the ground. Then the land. Either property tax on ground that keeps getting more valuable, or a land lease that keeps climbing every time it renews. Then programming and staff. If you make local content. Most stations have cut this to the bone, which is why so many just lease their hours out instead. And falling against all of it, the revenue. The ad money has gone to the internet, so the broadcast side often loses money every month, and the whole site is carried by the value of the land alone. The trap. Here is the trap, in one sentence. You buy it as a media business, and it is really a real estate business wearing a media costume, and most people find that out too late. Run it as a proud radio station, and you are fighting a dying ad market with a power-hungry transmitter and an audience that ages a little more every year. And the ground is falling out from under the broadcast under it in plain sight. About half of all AM listening happens in cars, and the car makers are unplugging it. Ford is pulling AM out of all of its vehicles. Tesla, BMW, and others are dropping it from their electric cars because the electric motors interfere with the signal. That listener in the driver's seat is quietly being cut off. Bet on the broadcast, and the floor is disappearing beneath you. The only thing still holding its value is the dirt, the man who built the first one. To understand why the station was never really the product, go all the way back to the very first one. In 1920, a Westinghouse engineer named Frank Conrad had a hobby. From a shack in his garage in a Pittsburgh suburb, he played phonograph records over an amateur transmitter and slowly built up a small local audience of hobbyists tuning in for the music. Then a Pittsburgh department store, Horns, ran a newspaper ad selling radio receivers, pitched as a way to hear Conrad's broadcasts. A Westinghouse vice president named Harry Davis saw that ad and understood what most people had missed. Broadcasting was not the business. It was the reason to buy the radio set, and Westinghouse manufactured radio sets. So Westinghouse built a real station, put a 100-watt transmitter on the roof of their Pittsburgh plant, and got the first commercial broadcasting license in the country. On election night, November 2nd, 1920, that station, KDKA, broadcast the presidential race results, and people heard who won before the newspapers could even print it. Radio, as a business, was born that night. But look at what it was born as. KDK existed to sell radio receivers. That station itself was never the product. It was the loss leader for the hardware. 100 years later, the AM station is still not the product. Now it is the loss leader for the land. From the very first broadcast, the signal was worth something other than itself. The biggest failure, the biggest name in the entire business, shows what happens when you bet everything on the broadcast and forget the math underneath it. iHeartMedia, once known as Clear Channel, was the largest radio company in America, with around 850 stations. In 2008, the private equity firms Bain Capital and Thomas H. Lee Partners took it over in a leveraged buyout and loaded roughly $10 billion of buyout debt onto the company itself. Its total debt climbed past $20 billion. Then, the ground shifted underneath it. Radio advertising went flat, then fell, as ad dollars rushed off to Google and Facebook, while streaming and satellite radio chipped away at the audience. iHeart did not post an annual profit for a full decade, drowning in interest payments on buyout debt, in a business whose revenue was quietly leaking away. In March of 2018, after skipping a single interest payment of $106 million, iHeartMedia filed for bankruptcy protection, carrying more than $20 billion of debt. It was the largest bankruptcy in the history of radio. And here is the tell. On the way down, iHeart and companies like it sold and leased off hundreds of their tower sites to real estate and tower companies. Its operating business collapsed under the debt. The real estate got sold to survive. Even for the giant of the industry, the dirt outlasted the broadcast. How the survivors do it. 5 habits, straight out of everything you just saw. Habit 1. Buy the dirt, not the dream. Underwrite the whole deal on what the land is worth and what else the tower site could become, never on the advertising. If the ground is worth more as a warehouse or housing, you have a floor that no radio decline can ever touch. Habit 2. Stack the tower's other income. Rent space to cellular carriers, around $2,500 a month each, while they pay the upkeep, and run an FM translator to keep the signal alive. Habit 3. Lease the airtime instead of fighting the ad market. Sell blocks of hours to religious, ethnic, and paid programmers who arrive with their own money and their own listeners. Habit 4. Know whether you own or lease the ground. If you lease it, your whole business can vanish the day the landlord sells. If you own it, you are the one holding the asset everybody actually wants. Habit 5. Have an exit. The smartest owners today are not trying to save AM radio. They are timing the sale of the land to a developer or a tower company, and moving or shutting the station down the moment the dirt is worth more than the broadcast. Does this actually work? Both ends, very clearly. The good version. You buy a station cheap, on a big piece of land that has quietly become valuable. Cover your costs by leasing airtime and renting the tower to cellular carriers, then sell or develop that land for many times what you paid for the whole thing. Ask WFME's owner, who turned one tower lot into $51 million. The bad version. You buy it as a proud local radio station, pour money into programming and a power-hungry transmitter, watch the ad revenue and the car dashboards disappear, and bleed money every month, like the operating side of the whole AM industry, while giants like iHeart drown in billions of debt beside you. Put the two on one page. The owner who saw real estate, cheap going in, land sold for a fortune coming out, and the owner who saw a media business, dying ads, rising costs, and a bankrupt giant for company. Same tower, opposite outcomes. Broadcasting was never really the point. So does it work? Yes, if what you are actually buying is the land and the tower's side income. And no, if you believe the future is in the broadcast. Everything here lands on one strange truth. You were never really buying a radio station. 100 years ago, Westinghouse built the first station to sell radios. Broadcasting was never the product. It was the reason to buy the hardware. 100 years later, iHeart, the biggest broadcaster of them all, drowned in $20 billion of debt as the advertising vanished, and quietly sold off the ground beneath its towers to stay alive. And a 5-acre lot in New York, held for decades only because a radio tower stood on it, sold for $51 million for the dirt. Signals fade, audiences age out, the dashboard goes quiet, but the ground the tower stands on only grows more valuable as the city fills in around it. You were never buying a radio station. You were buying a patch of land that happened to have an antenna bolted to it. And the day that antenna is worth less than the dirt beneath it, and for most of them that day has already arrived, the antenna comes down.